Hello friends, welcome back to Jboss series, part third. In this part, we are going to discuss about the different profiles which we have in Jboss along with the socket bindings and one more topic which is process controller. In part one, we have covered about the domain controller, host controller, and then a little bit about server groups and some other important terms like the different modes of Jboss servers. Okay, so now we will discuss about in continuation of same about process controller, different kind of the profiles and the different kind of the socket bindings what we have in JBoss server. Okay, so let us take a quick recap before we go for a discussion in the process controller. So domain controller, what we have discussed is that it is a centralized controller point, okay, centralized point you can say, okay, which is used to control all of your managed server or JBoss server instances in your domain mode. Okay, so what exactly is domain mode? Where we have a multiple uh, instance of Jboss are running, okay, where you have deployed the same kind of application for high availability purpose. Okay, so in a nutshell, you can say domain controller is a central point for maintaining or to maintain the complete end-to-end configuration of the domain, okay, which where we have the multiple instances of Jboss instances are running in parallel for the high availability. Okay, and when we talk about the host controller, so it is apart from the domain controller, we have an individual controller on each and every host, which we call as a host controller. Okay, so whenever, as I said, domain controller is a centralized point, okay, from where we manage all of the standalone instances, those are running in different servers. So apart from that, we have a host controller on each and every server, okay, and whenever a domain controller initiate the configuration for all of the servers which is there in the domain, so it is communicated to all of the instances with the help of host controller. So there would be a single host or controller process which is running on each and every server instances. Okay. And your domain controller contact your host controller, and then host controller can initiate the configurations in the different Jboss server instances. Okay, and third is the process controller. So process controller is another process. Okay, another why I'm saying it's another process because it runs on the own JVM. Okay, because these all are the Java-based processes. Okay, or you can say Java-based code. Okay, if I'm talking about the domain controller, the host controller, process controller, they all are the logical terms, but they are executing on the Java virtual machine JVM. So whenever you are going to initiate the domain controller, a separate JVM will be initiated. Whenever you are going to initiate the process for host controller or similarly for process controller, a separate JVM process will be initiated. That means you will have a separate process for all three components. Okay. So process controller, you can say it is a kind of a helper controller for your host controller. Okay. So what exactly the purpose of this process controller is, you can understand in two way. Okay. Whenever your host controller get crash, okay, the process controller always monitor the process of host controller. Okay. And if anytime any host controller get crash, it will automatically start your host controller. So this is the first work of your process controller, where it is monitoring the process of your host controller. And if due to any reasons your host controller get crash, it will automatically start your host controller. This is the first one. Apart from that, whenever we initiate the start command for our different JBoss instances in domain mode, okay, and we know that is happen with the help of host controller which is running on each and every host. Okay, but there is a mediator controller in between, okay, which is called a process controller. Okay, so whenever you are initiating a centralized command from the domain controller to start or stop your JBoss instances which is running scattered across the different servers, it will contact the host controller, but the servers will be started by the host controller with the help of process controller. Okay, but as I said, in case your host controller get crash, your process controller automatically restart your host controller. But this is not the case in terms of the JBoss instances. That means if your if any of your JBoss instance get crash, okay, it will not be automatically restarted by process controller. For that, again, you have to initiate the command for restarting your JBoss instance from the host controller. Okay, so host controller again will contact your process controller, and then process controller will start your JBoss instance. Okay, so only difference, what is the exact difference is that your host controller will get automatically restart if it is crash, but your managed server will not automatically restart by process controller. However, whenever you are giving the command to start your JBoss server instances, it will be started with the help of process controller. So this is the work of your process controller. And you can see in a diagrammatic form. Okay, suppose this is your domain controller, which is also called a master, and then you have a two host where you have a two host controllers are running with the name of slave 1 and slave 2. Okay, so each and every host, you will have a process controller as well, corresponding to each and every host controller. Okay, and suppose that we have a four Jboss server instances, server 1 and 2 running on host controller 1, or you can say machine 1, and your server 3 and 4 running on machine 2, which is on host controller, where we have a host controller, another host controller with name slave 2. Okay, and all the server instances are in single server, which is a server group A. That means all of the servers are running the same versions of application for the high availability, just like we have a cluster in WebLogic application server, if you're aware about that one. Okay, and if you want to start your any of the JBoss instances, okay, it will be get started with the help of process controller, but the command will be initiated by the host controller. Okay, so host controller will send the command to process controller, and then process controller will start your JBoss server instances. Apart from this, as I said, your process controller will monitor the process of host controller as well, and if any time it get crashed, then it will be get automatically restarted by process controller. So this is the work of your process controller. Now, another important component in JBoss is your profiles. Okay, there are different kind of profiles, whether it is a standalone domain, whether it is a domain mode domain. Okay, you have a different profiles. Okay, and different profiles in the sense each profile is associated with the corresponding functionalities. Okay, if you wanted to enable or disable certain kind of functionalities, or based on the your requirement, what kind of functionalities you need for your applications, you can enable the corresponding profile. And once you will enable the corresponding profile, then only the corresponding functionalities will get enabled, otherwise it will not. So a profile consists of a collection of available subsystems along with each subsystem specific configuration. Okay, so this collection of available system is talking about the same, about the different kind of a functionalities you have in Jboss. For example, you need a load balancing or high availability configuration with your web server. You may need the messaging systems, right? And then you may need some different kind of a high availability configurations. Okay, that will be possible with the help of different profiles. So a profile with a large number of systems result in a server with a large set of capabilities. That means if you are assigning a high profile, that means there are a lot of functionalities will get enabled with the help of high profile. If it is a small profile, that means only a limited functionalities will get enabled with the help of your that particular profile. Let us talk about the different configuration files. Okay, and when we talk about the standalone mode, okay, then we have certain configuration files. The first important file is standalone.xml. Okay, so this is the main configuration file for your server JBoss server instance when you start or use your JBoss in the standalone mode. Okay, so whenever you start your standalone server, it reads this configuration file for all of the configurations, and it will include all of the subsystems, that means all of the functionalities or profiles that you have enabled for your JBoss instance. Apart from that, you need a lot of networking components, deployment, socket bindings. Okay, that means different kind of sockets or different kind of ports used by your JBoss instance, and then you have a lot of other configurations. Everything is will be there in a single file that is called a standalone.xml file. Okay, and it does not provide a subsystem necessary for messaging or high availability. As I said, there are a different kind of a profiles available in JBoss, and it depends on the which kind of a profile you are going to be enabled for your for your JBoss instance, then the functionality will enable, right? So standalone, when you start your standalone server with the help of default script, which is called standalone.sh or .bat in your Windows, okay, then it will use the standalone.xml file by default. But in that case, the messaging and the some high availability configurations like integration with web server functionalities will not be enabled. For that, there's a different XML files are provided. If you want that functionality, then you can start your JBoss server using that particular XML file. So as I said, if you are not specifying any file during the startup of a standalone mode, by default, it will read the standalone.xml. And apart from that, you have option when you are starting your JBoss instances, you can give the parameter of particular XML file, and it will refer that particular XML file when starting. So another file is a standalone -exe.xml. As name is specified, it has some high availability functionalities enabled in this XML file. Okay, so that means it include all of the default systems and add the mod cluster and J group system for high availability. So mod cluster and J groups are used when you go for the integration of your web server with the web server. So if you wanted to integrate your web server with your standalone JBoss instance, then you have to start your JBoss instance with the help of standalone-ha.xml file. I will show in the next slide how you can start using that particular XML file. Apart from that, you have a third file which is called standalone-full.xml. So in standalone-xa, your high availability configurations will be available, but still your messaging system will not be available. Now, when we talk about standalone-full.xml, so if you wanted to enable the messaging system as well, okay, you want to enable the messaging system for your Jboss system, you are using the messaging functionalities, then you have to use this particular profile when you are going to start your standalone Jboss server. But in this system, you will not have the high availability options, which was there in the second one, standalone-xa.xml. Okay. And when we talk about standalone full ha.xml, that means it has the full complete functionality. That means it will have all the necessary functionalities that is there in the basic standalone.xml file. It has all the capabilities that is there in the -ha.xml file, that is for high availability configurations. It is also have the functions which is there in -full profile, that is means for the which is going to be used for the your messaging system as well. So this is the highest profile which will have all the configurations. Apart from that, one more profile is introduced some time back, which is standalone-load balancer.xml. So as it is clear from the name, this configuration file will only contain the subsystem for the configurations of the mod underscore cluster, okay, which is used for the front end your load balancer with the help of some web servers. So these are the different kind of profiles in your standalone mode, and the purpose that I have discussed, what is the purpose of each and every profile. Okay, so all these files will be there inside your configuration folder, right? Whenever, that means whenever you installed Java, your Jboss, okay, that home is called EAF home in case of a Red Hat Jboss or whatever the name you prefer. Okay, inside that you will have a folder standalone. Inside that you will have a folder called configurations, and inside that you will see all the configuration files along with all the profile XML files. Okay, so as you see in the screen, when you're starting the Jboss instance standalone.sh, then you have to give the particular profile with the help of -server-config equal to the name of your XML file. So whatever file you will specify there, it will start your Jboss server instance with the help of that profile and enable all the functionalities that is corresponding to in that particular profile. Okay, so these are the different profiles as we have discussed. You will see all the profile files inside the configuration folder. And one more thing, for standalone, different profiles are provided with separate XML files and used when starting the server. That means we have discussed about the 5 different kind of profiles in your standalone mode. So if you need the functionality of any of the profile, then you have to specify the name of the corresponding profile when you are starting your Jboss server instances. Okay, it's not like that you have a configuration inside a single file. Okay, so you have a different profiles. For each profile, you have a different configuration files. And when you are starting your server, then specify the name of your configuration or XML file when you are starting your server. Okay, however, when we talk about the managed domain, the structure is completely different. There would be all the configuration profiles inside a single configuration file that we are going to see in the next few slides. Okay. Now let us take a few important configuration files in your domain mode. Okay, manage domain mode. The first is the important file is domain.xml. This is a master configuration file. If you have a idea of the some WebLogic application server, then you will see there is a config.xml file, which is a master configuration file for your WebLogic server. Okay, even if you don't have an idea of WebLogic server, then you can consider this file as a centralized configuration file, which will contain all of the configurations of your managed domain, okay, including all of your profiles. So irrespective, or if you do a comparison with the standalone mode, in standalone mode you have a different profiles in different XML files which you were using when you were starting the standalone server instances. But when we talk about the managed domain, you will have a single domain.xml file which will contain all the profile information inside a single file. Apart from that, you have a host.xml file, which is the, you can say, is a master file for your host when we define. Okay, and the thing that we have discussed in initial lecture is that we have a two component, domain controller and host controller. Okay, but domain controller is a logical entity which is again a host controller, which we defined as a domain controller with the help of certain configurations, by saying that okay, I will use this particular host controller as a domain controller to control my rest of the domain, complete of my domain. Okay, so host configuration file is a specific which is there in the specific physical host. Okay, it is it will contain all the configurations of that particular host. Okay, port numbers and then maybe certain more informations. Okay, and this is specifically used when we defined our managed domain configurations. Okay, with the help of your different profiles. Okay, and apart from that, you will have a host-master.xml file, host-slave.xml file. Okay, and these files are same as the host.xml file. Okay, but only difference is that if you, as I said, you have to when we go for the configurations of the managed domain, then we defined one controller as a domain controller, other we define as a host controller. So this file you have for referring easily, you can use host-master.xml file for your domain controller, and then you can use host-slave.xml file for your different host controllers. Okay, and apart from that, you have a different profile called load-balancer. It is just like the same profile you have in the standalone mode, which is used in the domain mode for when you go for the load balancing kind of a configurations, like the configuration with your web servers. Okay, so for each profile, you will see these kind of a tab inside your domain.xml file. Okay, there's a profile tag. Inside profile tab, you will have a different 5 profiles. Okay, and for each profile, the configuration will be defined in the corresponding profile tab. Okay, for example, the default will be defined inside profile name default. Similarly, the HA profile configurations will be defined inside your profile name tab. Okay, similarly, you have a different tab for each and every profiles. Okay, and when we talk about domain mode, so different profiles are defined inside domain.xml and specified to server group when we create server group and apply to all servers in that group. Okay, so we know that inside when we create a managed domain, there we have a multiple Jboss instances running the same applications for high availability, right? So when we create the multiple managed servers or multiple Jboss instance servers, okay, then we define a particular profile to the server group. Okay, that means I have a server group A, which I have shown in the previous slide, where I had four Jboss server instances running in the server group, right? So if I'm going to assign a profile to my Jboss instance, then I have to make sure that each and every server assigned with the same profile. It doesn't mean that doesn't like that some of the servers are using different profiles, some other servers are using different profiles, specifically when they are in the same server group. So it is our responsibility when we are defining different Jboss server instances inside a single server group, then we have to assign a same single profile to all of the Jboss server instances. Then it is defined when you create your Jboss group. Okay, so when you create a server group where you have a different Jboss instances, then you need to specify a corresponding profile as well. This is a screenshot of same. That means whenever I am defining a server group where I am creating a multiple Jboss server instances, there I will select the my profile as well, which will be HA in the screenshot that you are seeing. So when you will select a profile for your server group, then you are creating, that means every in Jboss server instances that you are going to assign to this particular group will have the same this profile which you have created inside your server group. Okay, and similarly to your standalone mode, you will have a different profiles in your Jboss managed server domain as well, which is default HA, full HA, and load balancer, and the functionalities of all these profiles would be similar to which were there in the standalone mode. Okay, for default and then HA, where you have a functionalities for JGroup and mod cluster. When you go to full, then you will add on the messaging service as well. When you go for the full HA, then it will enable all of your functionalities. And then when you go for the load balancer, it will enable the mod underscore cluster for front end the load balancer like the web server. Okay, the functionalities of each and every profile would be same as we discussed in the standalone mode. Okay, and now when we talk about the socket bindings, that means socket bindings are the different port numbers. Okay, so Jboss use a different port numbers for different kind of services, like it is running a web server. For that, it is using a port. It is using a management console or a single centralized graphical interface console. For that, it is using a different port, right? Similarly, it has some internal system which is using a different ports. Okay, so all these ports are defined in a socket binding groups. So there is a group is created and all the subports are defined inside the particular group. So a standalone server contain only one such group. So when we have a standalone, then you will only have one group. When we talk about the managed domain instance, then you can have a multiple socket groups, binding groups for the different server groups, right? What is the server group? We have a different kind of same kind of applications running a particular server group. So there would be a possibility that we have a more than one server groups. They are running the similar application. Server group A is running application A, server group B is running application B, right? So that in that case, we would have to define a different socket bindings or different ports for our each and every server group, right? That means to each and every Jboss server instances and the web server which is running inside that one. So for that, we define a socket bindings in our Jboss server. Okay, and this declaration of socket binding is for a standalone mode. It will be inside your standalone.xml file, and when we go for the managed domain mode, it will be inside the domain.xml file. Okay, and this is the example of your server binding group in case of standalone.xml file, which is that means when we start our JBoss instance in standalone mode, then you will see this kind of a configuration. Okay, inside your standalone XML file for a socket binding group, where you have different ports, AJP port 8009, which we use when we do an integration with web server. Default HTTP port of your web server, which is running inside JBoss, is 8080. The HTTP PS port for the server is 8443. Okay, the management port is 9990. Okay, that means whenever you go to access your admin console of your domain mode, then you have to give the this port 9990. Similarly, when we use the port number in case of when we go to access the admin console of WebLogic, where we provide the default port number of 7001. Similarly, we have a default port here in JBoss as well, where we access the admin console with the help of port 9990. Okay, and we have to note that in standalone server mode, management port defined in standalone.xml file. So this 9990 management port, when we start using the server in standalone mode, it will be inside your standalone.xml file. Okay, and when we start our or use our JBoss server instance in managed domain mode, then this domain port is defined inside the host.xml file. So you will not see it inside the domain.xml. Okay, so because we have a different profiles here, right, and each profile is defined in the domain.xml file, right? So when we have multiple profiles, then that means when we go for when we have different profiles inside the same file, that means we have a different socket groups for each and every server, each and every profile. Okay, right? So we have a 5 different profiles in the domain mode. So that means we have a 5 corresponding socket groups as well. So whenever whatever the profile that we are using, the corresponding configurations will be get reflected from this particular socket groups. Okay, for example, if we are using a full HA profile, that means you have to go to enable the configurations which is there in full HA sockets. Okay, and anytime you are going to change any of your port according to your requirement, then make sure you are changing the port inside the corresponding socket group according to the profile which you are using. Okay, it isn't like that you are using a HA profile and then you are going for a change the socket inside your full HA socket group. Okay, it will not work because you are not using the correct profile and the correct socket group, because each profile has a corresponding socket group. If you are changing the configuration of any of your socket group, that means you are changing the configurations of corresponding profile. Similarly, when you are doing any changes to a corresponding profile, that means it will be synced with the corresponding server group. Okay, so these are the some basic overview of all of your process controller, then your different kind of profiles, configuration files, and the different kind of profiles which we have in JBoss server instances. Okay, and stay tuned for a few more interesting videos. I will come up with some advanced configurations a bit later, but as of now, in the next few sessions, I'm going to cover the installation of Jboss, and then your deployment of Jboss, creation of data sources, and then we'll go for some advanced options. Thank you.